evanescence of creation. If you cannot progress, at least don't lose what you already have. Endeavor to preserve this human birth. Get into spiritual practice strictly. After all, how many years all this will last? Say up to 10, 15, 20 or more. But after that, everything will be over. Nothing of this world will remain. The world is nothing but a deception. If you get into it, you will repent. If you don't get into it, still you will have to repent. Make yourself an instrument in the hands of God. Then you will proceed quickly. You may read Yog Vasishtha, but see that you are not detached from selfless work. From non-attachment, you get the knowledge of real nature of the soul. The world is unreal and without substance. You cannot realize the evanescence of the world until you have perfect non-attachment. This happens by past sanskars. To get one object, you have to renounce the other. You have only one mind. Put it where you like, either in devotion or in sense enjoyment, says Sant Tulsidas. Vivek, that is discrimination, is the mind of bliss. Household is the mind of suffering. If a householder is happy, then he is not at all a householder, but a saint. Be free of dualities. Never care even if people forget you. But you don't forget God. God is your relative even before your birth, now at present, and even after death. Self-surrender is the only way. Knowledge of God is attained through His grace. If your love for sense objects is more than the love for God, then He will not reveal Himself. By studying too many scriptures, He is not attained. The only way is surrendering oneself to God. Direct knowledge of God is obtained by taking refuge in Him. Make efforts, therefore, to realize Him. Just by the study of and listening to the scriptures, you may get some idea about God, but you cannot attain self realization by that. You have enjoyed once how blissful it is worshipping God, how much painful it is to leave it now. The shot that is fired never returns. Worship becomes an addiction like food. This is the result of practice. It is good if you feel peaceful after jap. Do not erase the state of the mind. This is the beginning of concentration. Gradually, it will appear that jap is continuing even in a subtle form. Having a peaceful mind the whole day, a feeling of happiness and peace after devotional practices, and getting submerged in worship of God. These are all the signs of progress. Always keep the mind busy in spiritual practices. The mind will become inactive quickly. Otherwise, the mind will jump from one subject to another. Be a witness of the mind. It is not easy to erase within 2 hours the mental modifications created in 24 hours. The whole day you are engaged in worldly affairs and you give only 2 hours in worshipping God. Here you do not enjoy the bliss in singing the glories of God, and there also you do not get any pleasure. Pray to God. Do your duties regularly. Act according to circumstances. With firmness, engage in spiritual disciplines. Let us not be indifferent to our duties and humanity. Then, hindrances to spiritual practices become favorable. For getting cured of the disease, the patient should keep full faith on the doctor. Taking medicines at the proper time, in proper doses, and observing restraint of cravings lead to the cure of the disease. It is same with the spiritual practice. Sit in meditation at proper time. Just after taking the seat, not a single external desire should crop up in the mind. The mind should be fully under control. Concentration is impossible for the restless mind. It is like weighing the frogs in a balance. They start jumping this way and that. If you want to weigh the frogs of your mind, then weigh it by tying in the strong cloth of practice. When there is a firm resolution and courage, invincible dam of the Guru's grace, coupled with surrender to God, success will be achieved. There is no end of our idleness, and there is no end of God's grace. Some people say that they do a lot of job, but they don't see any results. When dew falls in the night, it is not seen. Later in the morning, when we see the drops of water on the leaves, we come to know about dew. Similarly, the result of repetition of the mantra will be seen later. It is not so easy to do perfect jap of the mantra. Try to cultivate within yourself compassion, forgiveness, calmness, etc. Let us be worthy of realizing God. However much we perform devotional practices, unless we have developed virtues like compassion, all will be futile. We may cheat the world, but we can't cheat God. Some random teachings by Pujya Gurudev. The world is full of virtues and vices. Accepting the virtues and rejecting the vices is called vivek, that is, discrimination. Ram pervades the world. He is omnipresent. Do not delay in removing your faults. Do not be mistaken in understanding yourself. Charity should be of sattvic nature. It should be given by considering the appropriateness of the place, time, and worthiness of the receiver. A Brahman and a saint are always worthy to receive gifts or alms. Where there is a shortage of food grain, it ought to be given. A disabled, blind, old, or an orphan should certainly be helped. With a restless mind, one cannot live in solitude. It is impossible for a restless mind to become calm even in a solitary atmosphere. Being very talkative and restless is a hindrance for the peace of mind. The feeling of pleasantness in sense objects is due to forgetfulness of one's true nature. Haphazard or thoughtless spiritual practice is futile labor. As soon as one surrenders to God and gets rid of all egoism, he realizes his own true nature. Purity of the mind is essential in the quest of self realization. Purity of the mind comes from good deeds. Performance of good deeds is due to the grace of God. Grace comes from remembrance of God, which is again due to the grace of Guru. The grace of Guru comes if we deserve it. One should sit for meditation at regular hours. The mind will then gradually rise above the sense objects and turn into Chidrupa, that is, where the reflection of the self takes place. Without contentment, desires are not annihilated. One cannot be happy so long as desires are there. The way of getting rid of desires is Satsang, that is holy company. The mind becomes free of desires when one remains in good company. Our desires are like being in evil company. Getting rid of them is like being free of evil company. The omnipresent God certainly gives vision of His divine form to the devotee. Words cannot express it, it has to be experienced. Realize it by spiritual sadhana. God comes to those who are resolute in their worship. Self realization is attained if there is devotion and faith in God and Guru. Truthfulness never leads anyone to misfortune. The calamities that befall on truthful person do not last long. One needs patience. If the mind is immersed in contemplation of his Guru's feet, the aspirant gets rid of desires and gets peace of mind. Whenever there is any anxiety in the mind, at once remember God's name. By repetition of the God's name, distractions like lust, anger, etc. are removed. He is not a perfect devotee who does not see God everywhere. Giving up all deceits of mind, body, and speech, try to take refuge in God Ram. Make your heart tender when harsh words, hurtful actions, and thoughts are given up. The heart becomes tender. Be compassionate to the poor. Try to mitigate sufferings of the poor as much as possible. Give honor to all and never dream of being honored. Be unattached. The sense pleasures of the world are not eternal and hence subject to destruction. This conviction should be strong in the mind so that it remains unattached. Be humble, quiet, and gentle. Do not try to deceive anyone. Remain pleasant and happy in every situation. Know that dualities like profit and loss, etc., are due to God's will. Prayer. One should pray to God every day. Prayer should be considered as inevitable as food is for the body. If food is not available once, as during a day of fast, such as Ekadashi, etc., it may be alright. But one should not miss a prayer. There is a wonderful power in prayer. It can fulfill all necessities of life. There are hundreds of illustrations. It is an audacity to think that since our whole life has turned into a prayer, we need not sit in a solitary place at an appointed time for prayer. We should remember God at all times in whatever way possible to acquire God's grace. Receiving God's grace is the ultimate aim of man. He gets peace by doing so. Moreover, one gets more time in solitude. Those who wish to enjoy the bliss of remembrance of God, they should remain in solitude for at least 3 hours a day. Then, surely they will proceed towards their goal. From my limited experience, I have the firm conviction that in solitude, the mind remains so much sattvic and devoid of attachment and aversion as it is not possible in a crowd. Go on praying to God that you may have discriminative vision of the faults of the world and annihilation of your desires by having exclusive self surrender to God. Having thoughts of pure detachment that sense enjoyments are momentary, sense objects are not true but a delusion. Keep your mind busy in contemplation of God. Think of your own and God's true nature. Precepts. Everyone should rise before sunrise, and no one should go to sleep at the time of sunset. Dawn is healthful. One should pray to God every day. Prayer is as necessary for food for the body. It has got wonderful power. If we forget moral norms of good behavior, it yields immediate evil result, opposing fulfillment of our spiritual desires. Giving charity is always beneficial to the giver, whether you give it in the name of God or just for pity's sake or as humanitarian aid. Giving alms with a sense of duty is a human instinct. It yields good result. Never leave for tomorrow what you have to do today. Death never waits for anyone. Truth, when tested, its brightness increases. To preserve the permanence of a joint family, tolerance is the unfailing weapon. Do not give it up even by mistake. A teaching not influencing the taught is a proof of some drawback in the teacher. It is better to listen to the teachings and mold one's life accordingly than to teach others. The only way to be happy is to give happiness to others. Those who wish to have the vision of God should have the faith in the repetition of His name and should go on discrimination of truth and untruth with renunciation. If by a single dive in the ocean jewels are not found, it will be wrong to assume that the ocean is devoid of them. If you wish to have a steady peace of mind, then keep your reverence on God and strive in realizing Him. As soon as we get peace, all our sufferings will be uprooted. Remembering with faith the name of God is the unfailing remedy for hopelessness and intense sufferings. There is no doubt about it. It is not proper to be attached to material possessions. Money is not the goal of human life, but a means of livelihood. Thoughtless people make their lives miserable by giving undue importance to money. Having no faith on God is not a matter of harm for God, but it is a great loss for man. He is deprived of realizing the aim of human life, the grace of God, self realization. Remember, any addiction is harmful in the end. Don't get tempted by it. Leave it far aside. Your well being is only in avoiding company of addicted people. One should not be afraid of sufferings. Happiness is not possible without facing unfavorable circumstances with courage. A man without an ideal and control over his senses cannot be courageous. Expecting from him any pity on living beings and tendency to serve human is only imagination. Don't hate a sinner, but try to free him from sins by love. A person roaming about all day aimlessly comes back home in the evening is not considered a senseless or deluded man if he realizes his faults. Deliberate on this point. Whatever the God does is true. What else can a jeev do except pray to him? Parvati Khimji ka Jai Siya Ram.